Okay, we're going to get started. Hi, everybody. Welcome. Does everybody have the two handouts? One is the class syllabus. That's how I became a socialist, Jack London. Anybody have an extra syllabus? There's one right there. I love starting on time. I was a live television producer for many years. We always started on time. So I'm compulsively early and I always start on time. So I'm new to Fromm and I'm really happy to be here. My name is Barbara Lane and we're going to be together for the next 7 or 8 weeks. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about myself. Some of you I know, some of you I've just met today. But anyway, my whole life, I've been a voracious reader and writer. I usually have a couple of books going at one time, a real book, an Audible book, and a book on my Kindle. So I read a lot. One of my earliest memories is getting my library card. And it was a really special day for me. I went to school at Stanford, and I used to come up to the city and go to the Cafe Trieste and write bad poetry. I thought I was a beatnik. I don't think I wore a beret, but it's possible. After college, I was editor of a weekly newspaper at a place nobody had ever heard of, Telluride, Colorado. And I know don't ask me about buying 2 lots of land there and selling them the next year because that's a bad thing. But anyway, I was the editor of a weekly newspaper. I just loved it. And in the 80s, I came here to San Francisco and became the head producer of a TV program many of you might remember called People Are Talking on Channel 5, KPIX, which was a great experience for me, and did that for many years. Then I went to the Commonwealth Club and became director of lectures and literature there. And my last all-day, everyday job is what I call it, was at the Jewish Community Center of San Francisco, where I was, the best title in the world, Director of Arts and Ideas. And it was fabulous. We had writers, we had choreographers, we had composers. We had a really, really robust program, and that was wonderful. I've also been an interviewer at City Arts and Lectures, a book reviewer for NPR, and most recently had a book column for the San Francisco Chronicle. Sadly, all of the columnists except 1 or 2 have been discontinued, and I see people shaking their heads, sad, sad thing. But, oh well, I'm a newspaper. I still get paper newspapers, but it's a sad story. I've been in a book club for 38 years, and some of my book club members have taught here. Peter Stein, Ruth Stein, who's here today, and Mary Ellen Hannibal are all in my book club. It's just the best. So as I've described to you, I'm a producer. So my approach to this class is I'm not going to stand here and lecture. I've brought in guest experts in each subject who know a lot more than I do about these subjects, and they will be here. I think I found the best people. We also will have pertinent videos, clips of writer interviews, big moments like John Steinbeck's Nobel Prize speech, Joan Didion with Charlie Rose. And these are great fun to look at. Some of you might remember the Steve Allen Show. Jack Kerouac was on the Steve Allen Show. So pretty great stuff. And Maxine Einhorn, who's here today, does a film series, as most of you know, and she will be showing the movie on Joan Didion, The Center Will Not Hold, which, if you haven't seen it, is just an amazing movie and pretty chilling. In some ways. The last 2 classes will have the authors themselves. Susan Straight, she writes about the Inland Empire of California, which is an area of the state that most people don't know about. Her novels are brilliant. I think we have some excerpts or the first chapter of Mecca, her latest novel. I highly encourage you, if you have time, to read the whole thing, but it's a big fat book. So, you know from the syllabus, we'll be talking about Jack London, John Steinbeck, Wallace Stegner, the Beats, Joan Didion and the LA Group, Susan Strait, and Tongo Eisen Martin. And by the way, I'm sorry to tell you, this class is not just Northern California. As you know from the names, some of them are Southern California as well. Steinbeck, of course, wrote about Salinas and the Monterey Bay. Didion, we know LA. And as I said, Susan Strait, the Inland Empire. The reading is optional, but will enhance your appreciation, I think, of the authors. But if you don't feel like doing it, don't do it. It's fine. Can I just see a show of hands of how many of you have read Call of the Wild? Oh boy, oh yay. Because after Jonah, I had was deciding between two ways to go. And since so many of you read Call of the Wild, I think we'll talk about that. And I hope that you'll participate. Otherwise, it will be really boring. I'll just stand up here and talk about it. So this is my first time at Fromm, so I'm asking you to be gentle with me. I'm told you're a tough crowd, but also I'm open to constructive criticism. Really, people say that, but I really am. But every class will be different. So if you didn't like today, you might like the next time. So come back. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce our special guest today, Jonah Raskin, and then he will take off on his subject, Jack London. All right. So Jonah Raskin participated in the 1970s radical counterculture as a freelance journalist in the East Coast, then returned to California in the 1980s to write probing studies of Abbie Hoffman and Allen Ginsberg and reviews of Northern California writers whom he styled as, quote, natives, newcomers, exiles, and fugitives. Beginning as a lecturer in English at Sonoma State University in 1981, he moved to chair of the Communication Studies Department from 1988 to 2007, while serving as a book reviewer for the San Francisco Chronicle and the Santa Rosa Press Democrat. He retired from his teaching position in 2011. He's the author of many books, and he edited a book on Jack London, The Radical Jack London, Writings on War and Revolution. Jonah was born in Brooklyn. He got his BA and MA at Columbia University, his PhD at the University of Manchester in England, and as a Fulbright professor, he taught American literature in Belgium. A longtime restaurant reviewer, book critic, reporter, journalist, and magazine editor. He has published both fiction and nonfiction, including, as I said, a biography about Allen Ginsberg and the Beats, and a series of murder mysteries set in Sonoma County. He writes poetry and performs his work at bookstores and cafes in the city. And I hope you have questions for Jonah. He wishes to take the questions at the end of his talk. So, Jonah, without further ado, here he comes.
Me.
It's not loud enough.
It's not loud enough? Okay. Is that good? All right, great, great. So in the old days, when I was a much younger person, I would have just stood up here and just talked. But given my current age, I thought it would best if I put my ideas back on paper and read what I have here. So I've rehearsed my talk. I don't want to read too slowly, but I don't want to race along either. I know that later this semester, real writers will be here in person. That's something Jack London can't do, though at times he believed in time travel. I'd like to suggest that I am the next best thing to having London here in person. I have been getting under his skin and in his head for a long time, and he's been getting under my skin and in my head. That's the occupational hazard of biographers. Recently, a friend asked me who was the most complex writer I've ever written about. I've written about dozens of writers. I thought briefly and said, Jack London. I hope that by the end of this talk, you'll understand why I said that. I hope you'll also understand why I say that Jack London, who was born in 1876 and died in 1916, is, in my view, the leading candidate for the father of California literature. I also believe that he's the perfect candidate for a course on history through the novel. No author reflects the era in which he lived more than he. There are other candidates for Father of California Literature: Bret Harte, the author of the legendary short story The Luck of Roaring Camp; Ambrose Bierce, the author of The Devil's Dictionary; and Frank Norris, the author of Mateague, subtitled A Story of San Francisco, and The Octopus, subtitled A Story of California. Norris died at the age of 32 in 1902, just as London's literary career began to take off. Harte and London, as well as Ina Coolbrith, the first California poet laureate, appeared in the pages of the Overland Monthly, once the major West Coast literary magazine, which was founded in 1868, less than 2 decades after California became the 50th state in the USA. Not only gold diggers, but writers rushed in to mine the wealth of the territory and to entertain folks. Oscar Wilde was one of them. He said famously, "Sooner or later, everyone shows up in San Francisco." It was indeed a destination for people from around the world. It still is. London read and reviewed Norris's The Octopus. He called the novel Norris's greatest effort and described the challenges that authors faced when they chose to embrace the West and write about it. It was big, it was untapped, and it was complex. A year before he reviewed The Octopus, London said that he wanted to write, quote, the great American novel. From the very beginning of his career, he was thinking nationally and then globally and soon even cosmically. His scope was vast. While he read and reviewed Norris, he also read and reviewed writers from way beyond California, including the Russian writer Maxim Gorky. John Rollin Ridge might be yet another candidate for Father of California Literature. A Cherokee from what is now Georgia, Ridge came to California during the Gold Rush and wrote and published the life and adventures of Joaquin Murrieta, the celebrated California bandit. That was in 1855. It was the first California novel to appear in print a year before Walt Whitman published Leaves of Grass. The history of California literature goes back further than many realize. If there are fathers of California literature, there are also mothers. Helen Hunt Jackson, who was born Helen Maria Fisk in Massachusetts in 1830, and who wrote the best-selling novel Ramona that awakened the nation to the injustices inflicted on Native Americans. Another mother, Gertrude Atherton, who was born in San Francisco in 1857 and who depicted California manners and morals in The Californians, 1898, at a time when many Americans thought of California as the wild, wild West and a place without manners and morals of the sort that obtained in Boston or London and in the fiction of Henry James and Edith Wharton. Unlike his predecessors in the field of California literature, including Mark Twain, Bret Harte, and Frank Norris, London was born in San Francisco. His mother, Flora Wellman, was a spiritualist and an unwed mother who thought she could communicate with the dead. I'd call her a bohemian or a pre-hippie hippie. As a young man, Jack London traveled widely in Asia and Europe and in both North and South America. And while he wrote about England, Japan, Mexico, the Yukon, and elsewhere, he lived almost all of his life around the Bay in Oakland, Berkeley, and in Glen Ellen, too, as well as in the city of San Francisco. The famed author's name at birth was not Jack London, but rather John Griffith Cheney. When his mother married a wounded Civil War vet named John London, John Griffith Cheney became John London. His mother gave him to a formerly enslaved black woman named Virginia Prentice, who served as his wet nurse and who raised him as her own child in the black community. Later, he would call himself, quote, her white pickaninny. The father of California literature had two mothers, one black, the other white, two fathers, one who mostly ignored him, though they were in the same household, and the other one who would not even acknowledge his existence. As a young man, John London Jr. declared his independence from his mother and stepfather in part by calling himself Jack. He, quote, mutinied against his mother and stepfather, ran away from home, and kept running in one way or another until he died at the age of 40. The author of dozens of books, which were translated into French, Russian, Spanish, Chinese, Japanese, and published around the world to great acclaim. When a friend of mine was traveling to China, I asked her to bring back a copy of London's Call of the Wild in Chinese. How do you know there will be a Chinese edition? She asked. I just do, I said. She brought me a lovely edition of the book. Henry James, London's near contemporary, said, it's a complex fate to be an American. London might have said, it's a complex fate to be a Californian, just as complicated as to be an American. After all, the California dream is the American dream writ large. About myself, I want to say that I didn't know I was a Californian until I taught American literature in Belgium as a visiting professor and after living in California for 15 years. At an end of the semester party, a student asked, where are you from? California, I said. Hard bodies, he shouted. He probably has seen too many images of surfers, though probably not a single image of Jack London surfing. He did that in Hawaii, which was for a time his home away from home. Living and teaching in Belgium and at a distance from California helped me to see I was a Californian. Reading Jack London also did that. London did almost everything a Californian could do at the end of the 19th and the beginning of the 20th century. Prospected for gold in the Yukon unsuccessfully, ran for public office in Oakland unsuccessfully. In Sonoma, grew grapes and bottled grape juice, which he sold with his name and picture on the label. That didn't succeed either. But he made heaps of money, spent heaps of money, and bought hundreds of acres of prime California real estate. So by the time he died, he owned more than 1,000 acres. Quote, it's money I want, or rather the things money will buy, and I could never possibly have too much, he said in 1899, just a few years after he joined the Socialist Party and soon became one of the wealthiest and most famous card-carrying socialists in the U.S., who helped Americanize a body of radical political ideas born in Europe and brought to the U.S. by immigrants who barely spoke English. London talked about socialism in a way that Americans could easily grasp, in large part by talking about himself, by making the political personal and the personal political. A few words about my sources and my scope. To prepare for this talk, I've drawn on the abundance of material about London, his nonfiction and fiction, much of it autobiographical, semi-autobiographical, or described autobiographical. My aim here is to encompass all of London's life and letters and not carve out just one area. If a scholar did that, one might think, for example, that London only wrote stories about the sea, like Typhoon Off the Coast of Japan, his first published work, only fiction set in the South Pacific, only stories about Indians in the Yukon, or only stories about dogs with names like Batard, Buck, White Fang, and Jerry of the Islands. Each individual thread in London's multicultural life has called to me. The threads woven together make for what I'd call the Jack London tapestry. I've been aided and abetted in my research by the 3 volumes of London's letters, especially the letters in Volume 1, which he wrote before he was famous and when he was less guarded about his life than he would become. London didn't consistently see himself clearly, but he had moments of insight, as when he wrote in John Barleycorn, his memoir about his bouts with alcohol and alcoholism. I'm afraid I always was an extremist. He did nothing in moderation. In his credo, as though to back up that claim about his extremism, he wrote, I would rather be ashes than dust. I would rather that my spark should burn out in a brilliant blaze than it should be stifled by dry rot. He burned brightly for decades and burned himself out. I've relied for this talk on the 2-volume biography by his second wife, Charmian, an author in her own right who served as his secretary, proofreader, typist, collaborator, and codependent. I've also learned from the biography by Jack's oldest daughter, Joan, who quoted her father as saying, I was a white man first and a socialist second. Joan also observed there was much in common between Jack London and Mussolini. Indeed, her father admired forceful, charismatic leaders like Edward Everhard, the revolutionary hero of the prophetic novel, The Iron Heel, which describes a civil war and the coming of a dictatorship to the U.S. 149 years after his birth and 109 years after his death, readers of London's books, even readers who are well informed, probably don't know everything about him. Jack muddied the waters of his life. His biographers haven't always helped. As Arthur Calder Marshall, the editor of the Bodley Head, Jack London observes, every writer gets the biographer who he or she deserves. London's biographers have also muddied the waters. More than a century after London's death, we know most of the crucial facts, the who, what, where, when, and why, though we don't often know the why. Perhaps more than any other major 20th century American writer, he valued sincerity more than veracity and the truth. He touted myth and mystery more than the factual and the biographical. I just reread his essay, How I Became a Socialist, which I read before, and I would say to you, it is mostly fiction. He did become a socialist, but he left out most of the crucial facts about the process. When Jack's first book publisher, Houghton Mifflin, wrote and asked for a biography, he replied in January 1900, my name is Jack London, from a Yankee ancestry dating back to the French and Indian Wars. That was a stretch. No documents verified that genealogy. He also explained, I was a boy in years and a man amongst men. Oakland, he wrote, was his home seat. His mother was his housemate. He added, quote, I have not married. The world is too large and it's called to insistence. But in 2 years, he would be a husband and a father. He morphed often and quickly. One of the earliest biographies of London is Georgia Loring Bamford's The Mystery of Jack London. Bamford recognized that despite all that she and others knew about him, mysteries remained. One of the biggest is not that he was born out of wedlock to Flora Wellman, the pre-hippie spiritualist who was abandoned by her common-law husband, nor was it a mystery that she tried and failed to commit suicide by taking laudanum and firing a gun at her head when Jack was in utero. Those facts were reported in the Chronicle when they happened. Biographers have had them at their fingertips for decades, though they have sometimes ignored them. The big mystery of Jack London is why he never wrote or spoke publicly about his birth and early years, though his wife Charmian and daughter Joan both knew that story. Was he ashamed of his birth out of wedlock? Did he not want to embarrass his mother, wife, and other members of the family? Probably. For an extremist who wrote openly about many of the dark corners of his life, including his alcoholism, he could be awfully secretive. London didn't read the Chronicle article about his mother and her attempted suicide, which was also probably a cry for help, not until he was an adult. Flora Wellman, who came to San Francisco from Ohio, had concealed her past and his origins from her son. After Jack read the Chronicle story at the age of about 20, he tried to find his biological father, Cheney, who came from Maine only to be rebuffed. Soon after Cheney rejected Jack's cry, he went to the Yukon, ostensibly to prospect for gold, but more likely to run from his past, from his depression and his sense of abandonment. You don't have to be a Freudian to realize that he was in search of a father figure. The title of some of his earliest books and stories, The Children of the Frost and The Son of the Wolf, suggest his preoccupation with parents, parenthood, and their offspring and descendants. Alfred Kazin, the author of On Native Grounds, a brilliant study of American prose, observed that the greatest book that London wrote was The Life He Led. London did indeed lead a colorful life. He wrote about his life repeatedly, but he also fictionalized it. The line between what he actually did and what he claimed to have done is blurry. Do I care? I do. I have skin in the London game. His life and his work matter to me. One winter, I poked around for a couple of weeks in London's archives at the Huntington Library in San Marino. For years, I attended the annual banquets of the Jack London Foundation, where I rubbed shoulders with London readers, most of them not academics, but rather people who loved his books and his legend. When I mentioned to Earl Labor, who devoted his entire life to the study of London, that the London aficionados were unfriendly, he looked me in the eye, smiled, and said, "Welcome to the wolf pack." I say to you today, welcome to the wolf pack. There were some friendly wolves in the pack, and so I joined them and added to the body of literature about the author. I edited a collection of works by London titled The Radical Jack London, subtitled Writings on War and Revolution. I divided that book into 4 parts, which I think correspond to the 4 major parts of his writing life. The parts are Boy Socialist, 1895, 1899, Comrade White Man, 1900, 1905, Apostate Revolutionary, 1906-1912, and Cosmic Voyager, 1913-1916. Part 1 offers a London essay titled What Socialism Is, which was published in the Examiner in 1895 when he was 19, and that earned him the label, quote, boy socialist. A socialist is of necessity social, he wrote, a comment that suggests his abiding sense of isolation and loneliness. He was an odd sort of boy and later adult socialist. By his own reckoning, which I believe is accurate, he never attended a single Socialist Party meeting, though he gave public talks about socialism. In 1903, he wrote and published in Comrade a brilliant essay titled How I Became a Socialist, in which he described his decision to join the party as a kind of religious conversion. A great many other American socialists, including Helen Keller, wrote essays about how they became socialist. As a socialist and a celebrity adored by women radicals like Mother Jones and Emma Goldman, and also revered by ordinary working people and college students from Berkeley to Harvard, Jack had the freedom to follow his own path, which I followed in part 1 of my book, and then in parts 2, 3, and 4, including in part 3, an essay called The Salt of the Earth, a celebration of the white Anglo-Saxons. Quote, eternal inequality is the iron rule of life, London exclaimed in that essay. Another surprising comment from a socialist who might have emphasized liberty, equality, and fraternity. Part 3, Apostate Revolutionary, highlights London's brilliant short story, The Apostate, about a boy not unlike himself who walks away from family, job, and home and goes on the road. The last section of my book contains Jack's 1916 letter of resignation from the Socialist Party, to which he belonged to 20 years and through thick and thin. I am resigning from the Socialist Party, he wrote, because of its lack of fire and fight and its loss of emphasis on the class struggle. Maybe that was the real reason, or maybe he disliked the anti-war stance of the socialists and wanted the U.S. to come to the aid of the Brits and go to war against Germany. He was a thoroughgoing Anglophile. I keep coming back to London, or maybe he keeps coming back to me. I've written about London's devoted followers, including Christopher McCandless, known as Supertramp, a bright young man who read The Call of the Wild and decided he wanted to live like London. But he starved and froze to death in Alaska, a story John Krakauer tells in Into the Wild. I've written about London's futuristic novel, The Iron Heel, which was the first London book I read and that I reread on the 100th anniversary of its initial publication in 1908. The Iron Heel is London's most widely read book around the world, though not in the U.S. The exiled Russian revolutionary Leon Trotsky hailed it because, in his view, it envisioned the coming of fascism. I also wrote a screenplay for a feature film about London that includes as the major characters Jack, Charmian, and Emma Goldman, the Russian-born Jewish anarchist who called London, quote, the only revolutionary writer in America. London was certainly more revolutionary than his friend and comrade Upton Sinclair, the author of The Jungle, a popular novel about the Chicago meatpacking industry, which London reviewed favorably and compared to Uncle Tom's Cabin. He hoped it would help to end what he called wage slavery, as Stowe's novel had helped to end chattel slavery. In 1905, Sinclair and London created the Intercollegiate Socialist Society, ISS, a leftist student group and a forerunner of Students for a Democratic Society, SDS, the 60s campus organization that opposed the war in Vietnam. If Jack was America's only revolutionary writer, as Goldman insisted, he was also, as I have been suggesting, one of its strangest. Socialism, he insisted, was, quote, devised for the happiness of certain kindred favorite races so that they may survive and inherit the earth to the extinction of the lesser, weaker races. If there's one word that explains Jack London, it's contradictions. The contradictions of California, which he explored in his writing. Less than 2 years ago, the New York Times published a list of about 60 books, both fiction and nonfiction, that were meant to, quote, explain California, though I'm not sure 100 books can explain the complexities and contradictions of the Golden State. The New York Times list, which might be described as politically correct, also included books by Wallace Stegner, John Steinbeck, Isabel Allende, Walter Mosley, Amy Tan, Joan Didion, and Tommy Orange. Only one book by Jack London appeared on the list. That book is The Valley of the Moon, a panoramic novel published in 1913 in which the two main characters, Saxon and her pugnacious husband Billy, leave working-class, strife-torn Oakland and wander about the Golden State. They discover that California is populated by Asians who farm more efficiently than white people, and they enjoy a long sojourn with the Bohemians in Carmel. At the end of the novel of their road, Billy and Saxon settle in the Valley of the Moon in Sonoma County and presumably live happily ever after. London had to make the New York Times list. His novels and stories have long been required reading in California schools and colleges and influenced writers such as Jack Kerouac, George Orwell, Ernest Hemingway, Cormac McCarthy, John Krakauer, and Cheryl Strayed. Over the last 100 years or so, London's life and his work have shaped popular perceptions of California. In New York during his lifetime, reporters and editors viewed him as Mr. California, the quintessential man of the West who dressed as an outdoorsman and seemed to embody California in his personality. If London shaped popular images and ideas about California, he was also shaped by California's political, economic, social, and cultural movements in the late 19th century, including anti-Asian bias. He wrote passionately about what he called the yellow peril. Plus, he was influenced by eugenics, the popular pseudoscience which advocated the elimination by any means necessary of individuals deemed to be inferior and unfit survival in the human jungle. London's defenders usually say that if and when he expressed racist ideas, which was often, though not always, that was because racist and white supremacist ideas were prevalent in American society during his lifetime. In his essay, Washoe Indians Resolved to Become White Men, he urged American Indians to go to U.S. government schools, give up their Indianness, and become white people. Yes, racist ideas were prevalent during London's lifetime, but anti-racist ideas also had a strong foothold in California and elsewhere. Mark Twain expressed anti-racist ideas, and so did novelist and critic William Dean Howells. W.E.B. Du Bois published the classic about race in the U.S., The Souls of Black Folk, in 1903, the same year that The Call of the Wild was published. In 1909, the year London's Martin Eden was published, Du Bois, Ida Wells, and several of London's contemporaries, including his friend William English Whaling, founded the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, which opposed government-imposed segregation, lynching, and the rule of Jim Crow. Working-class California put its stamp on London when he was a young man. In 1894, at 18, poor and unemployed, he tagged along with Kelly's army, a loose federation of workers who departed from Oakland and marched to Washington, D.C. to demand that the federal government create jobs. George Speed, second in command to Kelly, the leader of the army, observed London's relationship and wrote, Jack was never in the army or of it. In a telling photo, he sits at a comfortable distance from the marchers and keeps his own company. A belonger, he often remained an outsider. After a few weeks on the road, London departed from the army to see what remained of the 1893 World's Fair in Chicago. He visited an aunt in Michigan and made notes in a book in which he recorded his name as John London and observed that on one occasion, quote, he went down amongst the Jews of South Clark Street, where after a great deal of wrangling and talking, I bought shoes, overcoat, pants, and shirt. He tended to stereotype Jews and members of other immigrant groups, though for a time he was passionately in love with Anna Strunsky, a Russian-born Jewish socialist who turned down his marriage proposal and urged him not to offer hackneyed views of Jews. In Buffalo, New York, in 1894, Jack was arrested for vagrancy, sentenced without a trial to 30 days in the Erie County Penitentiary, where he told the jailers that he was a sailor and an atheist. He relates his prison experience in The Road, which was published in 1905, and that inspired beat writer Jack Kerouac when he wrote On the Road. In The Road, London describes himself, quote, as a stranger in a strange land, and, quote, a fluid sort of organism who enjoyed hobo land and where he saw, quote, the face of life is protean, an ever-changing phantasmagoria where the impossible happens and the unexpected jumps out of the bushes at every turn. In the Golden State, more than in any other place in the U.S., perhaps, and even on the earth, life can truly be said to be protean. In California, the impossible and the unexpected are part of everyday reality. Rather remarkably, Jack London, a kid from a broken home who never graduated from college and who worked in factories as a boy, grew up to be a best-selling author and a hero to people around the world. He embodied the American rags to riches story, the myth become real. California figures in nearly all of Jack's books. The Call of the Wild begins in California. White Fang ends in California. The climactic scenes in The Iron Heel take place in Chicago, but the woman who tells the story is hiding in California. Much of Star Rover, a late novel, takes place at various historical times and in diverse geographical locations, but the main character is locked up behind bars in San Quentin, the prison, and has the power to transcend walls and boundaries and time travel into the past. That book reflects the mystical Jack London. California occupies all the pages of the Valley of the Moon, which is a good reason to include it on a list of great books about the Golden State. Still, that novel often leaves me indifferent, though the parts about the labor movement in Oakland are a treasure. Unlike The Call of the Wild, Martin Eden, or The Scarlet Plague, which describes a pandemic that wipes out nearly all of humanity, The Valley of the Moon tends to be mellow. If it has a theme, it might be that paradise is close to home and hiding in plain sight. It is London's only book with a complex female character based in part on his wife, Charmian. For decades, London not only lived around San Francisco, but on the bay itself as an oyster pirate and a member of the Fish Patrol charged with apprehending oyster pirates. Curious that he was a pirate and also belonged to law enforcement. As a sailor, he moved about the bay aboard his own boat, which he called the Razzle Dazzle. He was a razzle dazzle kind of guy, charismatic and handsome, and a man for all seasons, a white supremacist, a jingoist, an internationalist, an animal lover, an able-bodied seaman, a globetrotter, a celebrity, a photographer who traveled widely with his Kodak, an ex-con, a hobo, a member of the Back to the Land farming movement. He was also a gifted sports reporter who loved boxing and an early admirer of moving pictures and the movie industry, which translated his books from the printed page to the big screen. He spent a lot of time in Hollywood just as it was becoming the film capital of the world and learned about Hollywood ethics, or rather lack of the same. He fought to protect copyright. His estate lost the battle. Today, all of his work is in the public domain. Also, he was an alcoholic and a workaholic who chain smoked cigarettes, even in bed, before going to sleep, and nearly burned down his cottage. He thought of himself as a physical culturalist who took pride in posing for photographs wearing only his briefs. Vichy Springs in Utah uses an image of a mostly nude Jack to promote its spa. Perhaps you've seen the billboards on 101 going north. Let me also say about a man who can't be easily summarized. London was a disgruntled son, a peeved parent, a romantically inclined and paradoxically a practically minded lover and husband, an animal rights activist, book reviewer, war reporter, and at various times a Darwinian, a Marxist, a Nietzschean, at the end of his life a Jungian. He never met a big idea he didn't like. Not surprisingly, told one of his best friends, Cloudley Johns, a small-town California postmaster, that he had 6 different selves. Did something hold his selves together? In a word, California, a many-sided place with no fixed identity. Not surprisingly, since he had a double vision, a way of seeing things, people, and situations from dual perspectives, London was haunted by a real double, a man who impersonated him, claimed to be him, wrote checks in his name, introduced himself as Jack, the famous author, and tried to seduce women. Fame had its pitfalls. Jack's double literary vision is apparent in To Build a Fire, which has 2 different endings. One in which the unnamed protagonist lives, another in which he dies. The Iron Heel has 2 endings, one in which the oligarchs defeat the revolutionaries and the others in which the revolutionaries defeat the oligarchs. The short story, South of the Slot, recounts the life of a man with 2 different identities, one as a professor, the other as a labor organizer, one engaged to a debutante, the other in love with a working-class activist. Jack wanted to write about his double. An editor told him to hold off. The U.S. was about to go to war in Europe, and war news was hot, not London's double. Then Jack died before he could carry out his ideas. Today, he's remembered by readers the world over. Tourists and locals flock to Jack London Square in Oakland and Jack London State Historic Park in Sonoma County. A few go out of their way to see in San Francisco a plaque that marks the place of his birth on January 12, 1876, the year of the American bicentennial. That year also marked the publication of The Adventures of Tom Sawyer by Mark Twain, a writer Jack admired and from whom he purloined ideas. A literary thief big time, London stole, for example, from Herman Melville's Moby Dick and from Rudyard Kipling's Captains Courageous. He used what he pilfered in The Sea Wolf, which features an Ahab-like captain and a boy like Kipling's kid. There's no end of Kipling in my work, London boasted. As Oscar Wilde and T.S. Eliot both observed, talent borrows, genius steals. Jack London was a genius. He was also an emotional and a psychological wreck who grew up in a dysfunctional family in which he felt like an outsider and an orphan who existed on the abyss of alienation and loneliness. Paradoxically, or perhaps not, out of his early loveless and lonely experiences, he drew sustenance and found a font of creativity. Like many Californians today, he tended to be hopeful, though he also had a dark, dark side. Have I left out anything of importance? Yes, I think so. He did have a sense of humor. Outside his cottage, for example, he had two signs. One of them read, "No admission except on business." The one beneath it said, "No business discussed or conducted here." The first line of The Call of the Wild, I think, is also supposed to be humorous. It reads, "Buck did not read the newspapers." You don't get the humor until you realize that Buck is um, a dog. Remember also that he adopted the wolf as his totem, used an image of a wolf on the covers of his books, signed his letters wolf, ended letters with the rallying cry, "Yours for the revolution." For a time, he meant violent revolution, similar to what the Russians did in 1905 and would do in 1917. Had he not died in 1916, he might have traveled to Russia with John Reed, observed the Bolshevik Revolution, and wrote about it, either praising or damning it. Ambivalence was written into his bones. When Jack built his dream home on the property that he called Beauty Ranch and where he lived like a robber baron, he called it Wolf House. The structure burned down. You can see the remarkable ruins at the park. Remarkable because of their stark beauty, and remarkable too because in California, ruins are often torn down and something new is built in their place. Critics have tried to tear Jack London down. No one has succeeded. I've aimed here to describe him in the round, not to censor him or cancel him or argue that his books be removed from libraries. London is, I hope, a permanent figure in the California literary firmament, though a symphony based on his life was recently canceled by the Santa Rosa Symphony, lest it provoke protests. They played it safe. I love Jack despite his flaws, or maybe because of them. My parents moved to Sonoma in 1907, 6 years before I arrived there. When I asked my father why he and my mother settled in Sonoma, he said, "If it was good enough for Jack, it will be good enough for your mother and me." My first day in Sonoma, my parents drove me to the park where I viewed the cottage where London wrote. I toured the House of Happy Walls where Charmian lived after his death and it became a museum. I saw the pig palace, the elegant quarters for his hogs, admired the stables for his prize horses, followed the stream that he dammed and that embroiled him in a lawsuit with his neighbors on Sonoma Mountain. He was always at war with somebody or something. In the end, it was water, the most precious of California resources. In 1903, which marked the 100th anniversary of the publication of The Call of the Wild, London's best-known work in the U.S., I read it for the first time and was electrified. The author's infectious prose style inspired me, as well as the structure of the narrative and the titles for the individual chapters, especially Chapter 3, The Dominant Primordial Beast. Clearly, London was a writer in love with language and preoccupied, if not obsessed, with ideas about the wild, about domination, bondage, and freedom. I still admire The Call of the Wild, though I am often distressed by its popularity, much as I am distressed by the popularity of his short story To Build a Fire. London wrote more than 100 short stories, some of them including The Apostate and South of the Slot, which are as good as To Build a Fire, though they are neglected. Early on, I realized that London was not primarily the author of dog stories, though he has often been remembered as the author of dog stories. Sadly, most of London's books are largely unknown and unread today. My three favorites are The People of the Abyss, The Road, and Martin Eden, his masterpiece, followed by The Iron Heel, John Barleycorn, The Valley of the Moon, The Star Rover, The Call of the Wild, and White Fang. I love The People of the Abyss because it offers a slice of authentic gonzo journalism before Hunter S. Thompson wrote Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. In London, England, London disguised himself as a working man, blended in with the locals, and in the style of the muckrakers, exposed the poverty at the heart of the British Empire. I love his memoir, The Road, because it illuminates the dark side of the American dream. It explores homelessness, human cruelty, the horrors of incarceration, and the power of storytelling. When he was on the road and hungry, Jack told stories for food. The successful hobo must be an artist, he wrote. He must, quote, create spontaneously and instantaneously, and not upon a theme selected from the plenitude of his own imagination, but upon the theme he reads in the face of the person who opens the door. He added, I have often thought that to this training of my tramp days is due much of my success as a writer. Martin Eden, his autobiographical novel, I was Martin Eden, he would say, and a prime candidate for great American novel, contains some of the most beautiful writing in our literature. The protagonist, Martin Eden, who never has an Edenic life, leaves San Francisco, boards an ocean liner, and heads into the Pacific, which he has navigated as a sailor, alone in his cabin. I can't hear you.
If you have a lot more, we should take questions or take a break.
Okay. I want to just say, read the very ending of Martin Eden. Colors and radiances surrounded him and bathed him and pervaded him. What was that? It seemed a lighthouse, but it was inside his brain, a flashing bright white light. It flashed swifter and swifter. He was falling down a vast stairway. He had fallen into darkness, and at that instant he knew he ceased to know. That's pure genius. That's Jack London at his best. Thank you, Jack, for being yourself. I know I could never have changed you or persuaded you not to be an extremist. By exploring the extremes in your own self, you showed what it could and might mean to be a Californian. Thank you very much.
Jonah, I'm happy to have made the choice to have you talk about Jack London, because obviously your scholarship and your immersion in your life and your love for him is, I would think, unparalleled. So does anyone have questions for Jonah? I mean, this is a description of such a remarkable man and a multifaceted career. Um, it's kind of astounding. Does anyone have questions about anything? Yes. His childhood, his education, and the beginning.
Well, his biological father abandoned his biological mother and never acknowledged him as his son. That was so, and then his mother married John London. Um, Jack said that he and John London never really accepted him as a son or stepson. That there was tension between them. He did not want to be at home. I mean, I said that he muted. The word he used to describe what he did vis-a-vis his mother was mutinied. I mean, he left home. He got out of home when he was a boy, before he was a teenager.
So his education was very limited?
He, well, he did have, to a large extent, he taught himself and people could see that he was very bright and they took him under his wing. Like Georgia Loring Bamford and her husband was a librarian. Ina Colbruth, he went to the Oakland Public Library, and Ina Colbruth, like, she became his mentor. And I mean, he apparently also went to a saloon, and there was a dictionary there, and sat down and read excuse me, not the dictionary, yes, the dictionary. He was to a large extent self-taught.
Anybody else? Yeah, Ruth.
I just wondered, where was he living if he ran away from home? Was he living on the streets? Or did he?
Was he living on the streets? Where was he living?
He had jobs in factories. He sold newspapers. He took handouts from people. He was, he was really, he was on the edge. He was a street kid.
Anybody else? Yes, in the back there.
Could you talk for just a minute about his end with Charmian on shipboard? I understand that's something that the museum talks about.
Well, I suppose like a lot of other aspects of his life, there are different stories about how he died and why he died and what was going on at his deathbed. There were 3 different doctors at his bedside. There are some accounts that said he was in a lot of pain from various kind of ailments, and was on painkillers, including morphine. It is possible that he deliberately took an overdose of morphine, or that he miscalculated the amount of morphine he needed to take and needed in order to be pain-free. He at several times in his life, he tried to commit suicide, including the time that he jumped into the Carquinez Straits while intoxicated, hoping that he would drown, but he was rescued by a fisherman. There was another occasion which he writes about in John Barleycorn, in which he says that he wanted to commit suicide and he had guns in his house and he hid them lest he would find them and do the deed. So his widow, Charmian, insisted that he died of natural causes. Earl Labor, who knows more about London, or did know more about London than anybody else, thought that he died from smoking cigarettes. Or other people said it was because of his alcoholism. I would say that it's a mystery of why he died and how he actually died. I mean, an early biographer named Sinclair went to the cottage where he lived. When he went there, in those days, all of Jack's medicines were still in the medicine cabinet. They're not there anymore. And, there was a lot of morphine there.
So an enigma to the end.
An
There's a
enigma,
question here.
yes.
Hi, one question with 2 parts. You mentioned that he stole from some writers like Mark Twain. I was wondering if you could tell us of any writers that maybe stole from Jack London. And I was wondering if one of those is because you said something about how he once referred to himself as a stranger in a strange land. I was wondering if Robert Heinlein was one of them.
I know it's a memorable phrase, stranger in a strange land. It's possible. Excuse me. Perhaps one of the most memorable people who stole from Jack London was Bob Dylan. Yes, so Dylan wrote a book called Chronicles. And if you read Chronicles, and there's a whole bunch of phrases from Jack London's work that show up in Chronicles. There's no footnote, there's no quotation marks. You know, Bob Dylan, he just took things that he wanted to take and put it in his own book.
An example.
Can't remember. There are dozens of them. You could Google my article of Jack London, Jonah Raskin, Bob Dylan, Jack London, probably find what I wrote about it.
Okay, we're going to take a break unless there are any more questions. I'm told the standard is 10 minutes. Is that right? So we'll take a break for 10 minutes and come back again. Let's give a big thank you to Jonah Raskin.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Seated by wild.
Oh, well, I'm afraid I bored people.
Oh, God, no. Are you kidding? That's. Backstory part on Fogelson was the name. It's close. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they probably make. Thank you. And apparently, and I've seen. I heard you speak at the rehearsals. Right. So great. I know.
She's worried because she's.
You always think of that. Swimming. Up there. Got all of my notes for the doctor's appointment.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
So we're going to get started again in just a minute.
Yeah, I just checked if this is selected. That's good.
Okay, everybody. If we could just settle in again. Jonah talked about Charmian Kittredge London, and I just want to say a couple of things about her. You can see her up there with Handsome Jack, and she was a very spirited woman and a writer herself. She was the epitome of the modern woman, free-spirited, adventurous, and a literary trailblazer. And I urge you to take a look at the recent biography, Charmian Kittredge London, trailblazer, author, adventurer. The author is Iris Jamal Dunkel. It's a really fascinating book because Jack London looms larger than life. Charmian often was ignored, but she was an expert equestrian, a concert pianist, a best-selling author, and they sailed around the world together, and reporters just followed their every move because they were such a glamorous couple. She wrote 3 books about her travels, and even after Jack's death, she continued to travel and write. And she wrote a biography about Jack. And I just want to quote this because I love it. My love for Jack is a sort of worship, not a fetish sort of thing. It is a grand emotion, a high passion. I seem to love as always, as in a beaming light of him. Whom better could one worship? I say it to a friend of his. He was so grand. His life is immortal to me, even if he is not. I think you recognize the feeling. It preludes despair or true loneliness. It has been, and the afterglow is and shall be forever. I know he would weep should I miss one thrill of living. So that's what Charmian wrote. And after Jack's death, she continued to date men and famously had a short relationship with Harry Houdini. And she died at the age of 83 in 1955. So again, the book about Charmian is really terrific, and I would urge you to read it. We're going to move on to Call of the Wild, and we're going to see a film clip. There have been many films about Jack London's book, but I just love this. So here we go. Oh, where's Dawa? So glad you're here. I need to see the film clip, or everybody needs to see.
Attention, please. You're about to take your last look at Mr. Thornton's handsome, smiling face. So make the most of it, you weasel. Look it. Tell me about seeing things. Look it. Holy mackerel. It's gold, Claire. More gold than I've seen in my whole life. Oh.
I wish you hadn't.
Why not?
Oh, I hadn't let myself think about us. I didn't dare.
Why?
I don't know. But I've had some sort of a strange premonition. Something I can't exactly explain, but...
Explanations belong 5,000 miles away.
May I?
Yeah, sure.
I wouldn't presume to teach you feminine psychology. But I might add, very humbly, of course,
Yeah.
that if a woman is asked to do something, she's more apt to obey than when she's commanded.
So they don't make them like they used to. So a number of you have read The Call of the Wild, and I'd just like a quick kind of reaction to the book. If you read it for the first time or you read it before, I don't remember anything I read a long time ago, so I had to read it again. Does anyone want to give just a quick reaction to what you thought of the book, what you liked about it, what you didn't like about it? Please don't be shy. It's kind of a mini book club right now. Yes, sir.
Aside from the story, I was just amazed reading it again, how easily the prose flows.
Oh,
It is so easy to read, and how everything just sort of fit together, and the narrative was just, it was delightful just to,
yeah,
and it just pulls you in, and it was so easy.
yeah.
No, the construction of the sentences and paragraphs were very straightforward.
Definitely.
I really like that part of it.
Nothing abstract that you didn't understand.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Was it better? Yeah, over here.
Well, I went to Green Apple to buy the book and I went into the new books and used, and it wasn't either there, in either place. So I went to check out and I said, I can't find it. They said, oh, it's in young adults. And,
Of course it
young
is.
adult
Yeah.
classes. So I took it home and read it and I was frankly disappointed with the writing. I'm like,
Really?
gentlemen. It seemed to me he was just starting out as a writer, full of cliches, a lot of repetition. But what I also noticed is that the prose improved throughout the book, and towards the second part, I thought it was much, much better. But reading Why I Became a Socialist, it's as if a different person wrote it. It's much, much more sophisticated. He, in just a couple of years, he would so dramatically become a much better writer. I was just stunned by that.
So you can see how he evolved. Well, it was originally described as a young adult book, but then, of course, it became wildly popular with more mature readers. So the initial version of the book had illustrations. And by the way, the novel was banned in 1929 in Italy and Yugoslavia, supposedly because of London's openly socialist views. Jonah talked about that. And in 1933, it was burned by the Nazi Party. So we have, I loved it. I loved the prose style, not so great. Anybody else want to react to this
Someone on
book?
Zoom, would you
Sorry?
like, go ahead?
Yes,
Bill,
let's-
go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I hadn't read it in a really long time. So in preparation for today, I read it last night and finished it this morning. On the one hand, his descriptions and some of his prose is very, very good. On the other hand, the story is preposterous. I mean, what he's done is he has attributed human characteristics, thought, behavior, and motivation to a dog. Which, to me, in a sense, it makes it hard for me to take the book seriously as a work of literature.
Okay,
That's what I thought.
thank you. Thank you, Bill. Maxine, you wanted to respond to that?
I watched the film. I understand it's read in school, isn't it? And it's not read in the UK.
It's what?
It's not read in the UK in the same way in schools. But what struck me about it is to the previous speaker, it's very much a kind of morality tale. That's the way I understood it.
Well, I think he leaves that in there. Yeah, of course he does.
Keep going, Maxine.
I just see it as using the dogs as a kind, well, everybody knows that, as a kind of morality about the wild. So it's not
Somebody
meant to
else
be
over
realistic.
there, gonna comment? Jonah talked about Jack London being a social Darwinist. Yeah, did you wanna? Oh, sorry. He talked about London being a social Darwinist, and there is obviously some symbolism in here that we're looking at with Buck. Strains of naturalism, individualism, big time, and social Darwinism. So I think that we have to look at Buck not only as a dog, but symbolically. He becomes more and more individualist as at first he does everything he can to avoid the beatings and the fights, but it becomes a manifestation of the survival of the fittest, ultimately. So despite the seeming simplicity, there's, to my mind, and I think to many, a lot more going on than meets the eye. To me, that's hard to do. To write a book that seems so simple and yet contains a lot of big ideas isn't easy. You had a comment there?
when I loved his wilding of Buck. First, he took away his soul, right? I mean, Buck is the symbol, as you say, and he took away every ounce of decency. And then at the end, the nature kind of is like, this is where he belongs now. This is where the survival of the fittest belongs. But I also thought it was quite a comment on society. And I kept thinking about looking at events going on now and how cruel the world can be. And just, he really showed step by step this creature becoming increasingly cruel and the cruelty of the world imposing on him.
Great insight. Yeah, in the back there. Oh, that's Jonah. Well, you ought to come up and take over, I'm sure.
Oh, I can just read from here. The original title was The Sleeping Wolf.
Here, I'm gonna give you this, Jonah, because I know you have more to say than I would.
The original title was The Sleeping Wolf.
That makes sense.
So I think that what that says to me is that there's a wolf asleep in Buck. And when Buck is taken out of California, one environment, and he's put in another environment, the wolf emerges. And I think that was one of Jack London's ideas, of the power of environment to change animals and people. Somebody from one environment to another environment, and you're going to get a different person, which is one reason why he became a socialist. You take people out of the dog-eat-dog society and you put them in a more egalitarian society, and their better nature is going to emerge.
There you have it. Anyone else? Yes, in the back.
Buck was supposed to shed his civilization and become a resident of purer and simpler, more straightforward time and surrounding. So it seems to me that's what he was trying to do.
Okay. Any agreement, disagreement? Joe? I love having him here. Yes.
I would say the part of the, well, it started off as a short story. And London said that it got out of hand. He couldn't stop himself from writing. And so it developed in ways he had not intended. One of the parts of the story that I like the least is at the end where the wolf pack attack the Indians, which I don't think that, Indians on the whole lived harmoniously with animals in the wild. And I don't think there is any record of wolf packs attacking whole Indian tribes. That is Jack's, maybe that's his own racism emerging.
Thinking, yeah. Any other comments or questions? We have an expert here. So if anybody has questions, yep.
I like the beginning of the book, the description of San Jose and the happiness of Buck and roaming the farm. I loved his description. It was like the Valley of the Moon and describing Sonoma and walking to San Jose. I mean, he's such a great writer.
Yes. Yeah, and for a course on California writers, I mean, to me, who better to start with? I agree. Anybody else?
Barbara's gonna start laughing. I just want to say the movie angle. Right? Clark Gable and Loretta Young, we didn't get any bigger stars than them when this movie was made. So it's some sense of how popular he was, that Hollywood invested all this money into casting them, and it looked like it was a pretty good production values for a movie that was largely shot outdoors. Remember, they were mostly shooting in studios in the 1930s, so that was a big investment on Hollywood's part. And then next thing you said there was another version with Harrison
I
Ford.
saw it one with Harrison Ford.
So Harrison, so
It couldn't have been as good, was it?
again, this would have been, 40, 50 years after this film, if the novel is still kicking around enough to interest someone in Hollywood, and then to get Harrison Ford to star in it. So he was we need to get perspective on just how big he was as a writer. That's
Anybody else? Yeah, Joan, oh, we're gonna get another pearl, I know it.
I don't know if this is a pearl or not, but a friend of mine who's a Jack London scholar, teaches at the University of Texas, believes and has written that The Call of the Wild is an escaped slave narrative. That Buck is when he's in harness, he's a slave, and he escapes from slavery and he becomes a free person in the wild.
Pretty interesting. So unless, oh, I didn't quite make it to 140. Uh-oh, please don't complain. Next time, not next week, because it's a holiday, but the following week, we'll turn to John Steinbeck. And what I love is you can go visit Wolf House. And with John Steinbeck, there's a wonderful museum in Salinas that between now and 2 weeks from now, you might want to pop down, or really anytime. Thank you all for coming today. Oh, yes, here.
There are two books by Steinbeck on Sea of Cortez related. One is the log of the Sea of Cortez and the other is Sea of Cortez. Different books available, but Penguin.
Okay.
This one is the Sea of Cortez, which is 500-page book, so I'm curious.
I think it wasn't supposed to be the whole book that you were supposed to read. Did you look at the URL on the syllabus? Because I think that indicates it's not the whole thing you're supposed to read. So if you just click on that, and if anybody has trouble with that, I will describe it better to Carla, so you can know what to read. And I'll see you all in 2 weeks. Thanks for coming.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, those on Zoom. I have posted the syllabus as well as today's handout on the class page course materials. But just to remind you, for next week, the reading is John Steinbeck, Sea of Cortez, and the link that is provided in the syllabus captures that which you're supposed to read. Our guest speaker will be Mary Ellen Hannibal. Thank you. Hold on just a second.
Yeah, and when I got, then I took 5 people right PDF on summary, so I can see how it ended. But I mean, I'm like there, it's like me making, you know.
Mailed me a check.
It's